The wine bottle sat empty on the coffee table, mocking her with its label that promised sophisticated evenings and refined taste. Instead, it had delivered something far more dangerous, liquid courage mixed with heartbreak and a complete disregard for professional boundaries. Morgan Kelly stared at her phone, the blue light illuminating her flushed cheeks in the darkness of her studio apartment. The screen showed a message thread that made her stomach drop, even through the pleasant fog of alcohol. At the top read a name that should have made her throw the phone across the room: Theo Brennan, CEO. And below it, sent just 7 minutes ago at 2:47 a.m., were 2 words that would either end her career or change her life forever. "You up?" Morgan groaned, pressing her palms against her eyes, hard enough to see stars. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. Theo Brennan wasn't just her boss. He was her boss's boss's boss. The 36-year-old founder and CEO of Brennan Media Group, a publishing empire worth over $3 billion. He was the man whose office occupied the entire 40th floor of their Manhattan headquarters. The man who appeared in Forbes lists and dated supermodels. The man who had spoken directly to her exactly twice in the 3 years she'd worked as a junior editor. And she had just sent him a drunk text at 3 in the morning. "Oh God, oh God, oh God," Morgan muttered, scrolling up through their message history, which consisted entirely of professional correspondence about manuscript deadlines and editorial meetings. Her fingers hovered over the delete button, but what good would that do? He'd already seen it. The 2 small check marks confirmed her doom. The evening had started innocently enough. Her best friend Taylor had cancelled their Friday night plans last minute. Something about reconciling with her on-again, off-again boyfriend. Morgan had stopped by the corner store, grabbed a bottle of wine that cost more than she should spend, and settled in for a night of romance novels and self-pity. Somewhere between chapters and glasses, she'd started thinking about Derek, her ex-boyfriend who had broken up with her 6 weeks ago via a text message that read, "I think we want different things." What Derek had actually meant was that he wanted someone who wasn't married to her job, someone who didn't spend weekends reading manuscripts instead of going to his company softball games, someone more exciting than a woman whose biggest thrill was finding a perfectly crafted sentence in a sea of mediocre prose. The wine had made her melancholic, and melancholy had made her scroll through social media, which was always a mistake. There was Derek, his arm around a blonde woman at what looked like a beach bar in Miami, posted 3 hours ago. Apparently, he'd found his different things pretty quickly. Morgan had closed the app and opened her messages, intending to text Taylor something bitter and wine-soaked about men being garbage, but her contacts had been arranged alphabetically, and somehow her wine-blurred vision had landed on the wrong name, Brennan instead of Barnes. Now, sitting in the wreckage of her dignity, Morgan tried to calculate how quickly she could update her resume and start job hunting. Maybe she could move to another city, another country. Antarctica had research stations, right? Surely they needed editors for scientific journals, people who would never have to see Theo Brennan's perfectly chiseled face again, or remember the humiliation of... Her phone buzzed. Morgan's heart stopped. There, beneath her mortifying "You up?" was a new message. "Theo Brennan, CEO. I am now. You okay?" She stared at the screen, her wine-soaked brain struggling to process this response. He wasn't angry. He wasn't immediately forwarding this to HR. He was asking if she was okay. Her fingers moved before her common sense could stop them. "OMG, I am so sorry. Wrong person. Please pretend this never happened. I'll resign first thing Monday." The 3 dots appeared immediately, indicating he was typing, then stopped, then started again. Morgan held her breath. "Theo Brennan, CEO. Don't resign. Everyone makes mistakes. Get some water and aspirin before bed." It was kind, professional, exactly what a good boss would say to an employee who had humiliated herself. Morgan should have thanked him, apologized again, and turned off her phone to die of shame in peace. Instead, the wine made her honest. "You're being nice. Why are you being nice? You don't even know who I am." This time, the response came faster. "Morgan Kelly, Junior Editor, Literary Fiction Division. You championed the Patterson manuscript last year that everyone else rejected. It won the National Book Award. You work late most nights. You take the stairs instead of the elevator. You bring the same lunch every day. Turkey sandwich, apple, and those weird purple chips. And you're wrong, I do know who you are." Morgan read the message 3 times, each word sobering her more effectively than any amount of coffee could. Theo Brennan knew who she was. He knew what she ate for lunch. He knew she took the stairs, all 12 flights to her office on the 14th floor, because she claimed it helped her think, but really because she was anxious about getting stuck in elevators after a childhood incident she'd never told anyone at work about. How did he know these things? Before she could formulate a response, another message appeared. You shouldn't be alone and upset at 3 a.m. Want to talk about what's wrong? This was surreal. This was impossible. CEOs didn't text with junior editors at 3 in the morning. They certainly didn't offer emotional support to employees they barely knew. Morgan's journalistic instincts, honed by years of reading between the lines of manuscripts, started piecing together a narrative she didn't quite believe. Are you drunk too? She typed, then immediately regretted it. Stone sober, couldn't sleep, working on acquisition projections for Q4. Of course you are. Because you're perfect and successful and probably never make mistakes like texting your boss inappropriate messages at 3 a.m. There was a longer pause this time. Then, I make plenty of mistakes, Morgan, and for the record, you didn't text your boss. You texted me. Something in that distinction made her heart rate quicken in a way that had nothing to do with embarrassment and everything to do with the dangerous territory she was stumbling into. She should stop. She should put down the phone, go to bed, and deal with this catastrophe in the harsh light of Monday morning. Instead, she wrote, "What's the difference?" The 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times. When his response finally came, it was just 3 words, but they detonated in her chest like fireworks. Give me your address. Morgan's fingers froze over the keyboard. Why? Because you're upset and drunk and alone, and I'm wide awake with nothing but spreadsheets for company. Give me your address, Morgan. This was insane. This was how people ended up in true crime documentaries. But somewhere beneath the wine and the heartbreak and the shock of this entire conversation, Morgan felt something she hadn't felt in months. Curiosity. The same curiosity that made her a good editor, that made her see potential in stories everyone else overlooked. What would happen if she said yes? Her fingers moved across the screen, typing out the address of her small studio in Queens before her rational mind could intervene. She hit send before she could delete it. Don't move. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Morgan looked around her apartment, at the empty wine bottle, at the pile of manuscripts on her desk, at her reflection in the darkened window showing a woman in ratty pajamas with mascara smudged under her eyes. Theo Brennan, Billionaire CEO, was coming to her apartment. She had exactly 30 minutes to figure out if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life or if her story was about to take an unexpected turn. Morgan's apartment had never felt smaller than it did in those 30 minutes of frantic preparation. She shoved the empty wine bottle into the recycling bin, gathered scattered manuscripts into neat piles, and attempted to transform herself from drunk woman having an emotional breakdown into something resembling presentable human being. The cold shower helped, though her hands still trembled as she pulled on jeans and a sweater that didn't have coffee stains. By the time the knock came at her door, she'd managed to brush her teeth twice, run a comb through her dark hair, and convince herself approximately 7 times that this was all a wine-induced hallucination. Then she opened the door, and Theo Brennan was standing in her hallway. He looked different outside the sterile corporate environment of Brennan Media Group. No suit, just dark jeans and a charcoal Henley that made him look younger than his 36 years. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, and there was a 5 o'clock shadow along his jaw that she'd never seen in the office. But those eyes, sharp, intelligent, startlingly blue, were exactly as she remembered from the handful of times she'd been in the same room with him. "Hi," he said simply, holding up a paper bag from the 24-hour deli 2 blocks away. "I brought supplies. Coffee, bagels, and something called a bacon, egg, and cheese that the guy behind the counter insisted would cure any hangover." Morgan stared at him, her recently sobered brain still struggling to accept that this was reality. "You actually came. You gave me your address." His expression was unreadable. "Did you think I wouldn't?" She stepped aside to let him in, hyper-aware of how her 400-square-foot studio must look to someone who probably had a penthouse overlooking Central Park. But Theo didn't seem to notice the cramped space or the second-hand furniture. Instead, his gaze went immediately to the walls, which were covered in bookshelves stuffed with novels, and the small desk by the window where more manuscripts sat in organized towers. "You bring work home," he observed, setting the bag on her tiny kitchen counter. "Every night." Morgan closed the door, suddenly feeling the full weight of how bizarre this situation was. "Mr. Brennan." "Theo." He turned to face her, and there was something in his expression that made her breath catch. "When it's 3:30 in the morning and I'm in your apartment, you can call me Theo." She nodded, not trusting her voice. He began unpacking the bag, moving around her kitchen with surprising ease, finding mugs for the coffee without having to ask. The domesticity of it felt surreal. "So," he said, handing her a steaming cup, "want to tell me what tonight was really about? And don't say wrong number. I'm a good reader of people, Morgan. It's how I built my company." Morgan wrapped her hands around the mug, letting the warmth ground her. The coffee smell mixed with his cologne, something subtle and expensive that made her dizzy. "My ex-boyfriend posted pictures with his new girlfriend. I had wine. I made bad decisions. That's the whole pathetic story." "The ex who broke up with you via text?" She looked up sharply. "How did you—" "You told Priya in accounting. She mentioned it to someone who mentioned it to someone else. Things travel in an office." He leaned against her counter, cradling his own mug. "For what it's worth, he's an idiot. You don't even know him." "I know he let you go. That's all the information I need." Theo's gaze held hers with an intensity that made her stomach flip. "I also know you were going to text your friend Taylor, not me. The names are alphabetically close in your contacts." Morgan felt heat rise to her cheeks. "You've thought about this, "I've thought about a lot of things involving you, Morgan." He said it simply, without pretense, and the confession hung in the air between them like a physical presence. She set down her mug with shaking hands. "I don't understand what's happening right now, don't you?" Theo moved closer, and she could smell the coffee on his breath, see the flecks of darker blue in his irises. "You're a smart woman, one of the smartest people I've ever met. You see patterns in stories that other editors miss. Surely you can see this one." "See what?" Her voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "That I've been watching you for 3 years, that I know your lunch order because I've timed my trips to the kitchen to coincide with yours, that I know you take the stairs because I've followed you down them more times than I can count, always staying far enough back that you wouldn't notice, that the Patterson manuscript won that award because I personally ensured it got the marketing budget it deserved after you fought so hard for it." Morgan's mind reeled. "Why?" "Because you're brilliant. Because you love books the way I do, not as products to sell, but as stories that matter. Because you light up when you talk about a good manuscript. And I've structured board meetings just so I could watch you present." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so uncharacteristically uncertain that it made him seem human in a way she'd never imagined. "And because 3 years ago you walked into my office to pitch a novel everyone else had rejected, and you weren't intimidated by me. You looked me in the eye and told me I'd be an idiot to pass on it. No one talks to me like that." "You rejected it anyway," Morgan said, remembering the sting of that defeat, "because you were dating that Derek guy, and I have rules about workplace relationships, especially with employees." Theo's jaw tightened. "But when you mentioned tonight that you'd broken up 6 weeks ago, I've been trying to figure out an appropriate amount of time to wait before..." "Before what?" "Before doing something wildly inappropriate like showing up at your apartment at 4 in the morning because you sent me a drunk text." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his usually serious face. "I was thinking maybe 3 months would be professional, but then you texted me and I thought maybe the universe was giving me a sign." Morgan's heart hammered against her ribs. This couldn't be real. Men like Theo Brennan didn't pine after junior editors for 3 years. They didn't memorize lunch orders and follow people down staircases. They didn't show up in Queens at 4 a.m. with bagels and confessions. "You're my boss," she said weakly, grasping for the logical objection, even as every other part of her wanted to step closer. "I'm aware of the complications." Theo's expression turned serious. "Which is why nothing happens unless you want it to. And if you do want it, we do this right. HR documentation, department transfer. So there's no direct reporting relationship, complete transparency. I won't risk your career or your reputation." "Why are you telling me this now?" Morgan asked, though she thought she knew the answer. "Because life is short and I'm tired of pretending I don't feel this." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was gentle, reverent. Because I've spent 3 years being the professional, distant CEO, and seeing that text, even sent by mistake, made me realize I was wasting time. Morgan's breath caught. She should be logical. She should consider the implications, the office politics, the power dynamics. She should remember that she'd had too much wine and was emotionally vulnerable, and this was probably a terrible idea. Instead, she thought about 3 years of loneliness. 3 years of dating the wrong men, while the right one had apparently been watching from a distance, respecting boundaries she hadn't even known existed. 3 years of feeling invisible, while someone had been seeing her all along. "I need you to promise me something," she said quietly. "Anything. If this, whatever this is, doesn't work out, you won't fire me. You won't make my job impossible. You'll let me keep doing what I love." Theo's expression softened. "Morgan, even if you tell me to leave right now and never speak of this again, your job is safe. You're too valuable to the company. You're too talented." He paused. "And I'm not the kind of man who punishes people for not returning his feelings." She believed him. Maybe it was the wine still in her system, or the late hour, or the way he was looking at her like she was the most important person in the world, but she believed him. "Okay," she whispered. Okay. Let's see what happens." Morgan stepped closer, closing the distance between them. "But if we're doing this, we're doing it honestly. No games, no secrets." Theo's smile was slow and devastating. "No games, no secrets." He cupped her face in his hands, his touch warm and sure. "Starting with this, I'm going to kiss you now unless you tell me not to." Morgan had spent 3 years being invisible, being professional, being safe. She'd played by the rules and ended up alone and heartbroken. Maybe it was time to take a risk. "Then stop talking and kiss me already." When his lips met hers, it felt nothing like a mistake and everything like the beginning of a story she couldn't wait to read. The next morning arrived with the soft light of dawn filtering through Morgan's curtains and the disorienting realization that Theo Brennan was asleep on her couch. They'd spent hours talking after that first kiss, about books, about their childhoods, about dreams and failures and everything in between. Somewhere around 6 a.m., exhaustion had claimed them both, and Morgan had insisted he take the couch while she retreated to her bed, both of them too aware of moving too fast. Now watching him sleep with his arm draped over his eyes and his expensive shoes lined up neatly beside her second-hand coffee table, Morgan felt reality crashing back in waves. This was her boss. This was Theo Brennan. And she had let him kiss her, had kissed him back with an enthusiasm that made her cheeks burn remembering it. Her phone buzzed with a text from Taylor. "Brunch today? Need to tell you about Marcus drama." Morgan typed back quickly. "Can't. Having a crisis. Call you later." "What kind of crisis?" came the immediate response. Morgan glanced at Theo, still sleeping peacefully, and decided some things were too complicated for text messages. "The life-changing kind. I'll explain everything soon, promise." She was making coffee when Theo stirred, sitting up with the kind of elegance that shouldn't be possible after sleeping in dress clothes on a lumpy couch. His hair was adorably disheveled, and there was a crease on his cheek from the cushion. "Morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Tell me I didn't dream all of that. If you did, we're having the same dream." Morgan handed him a mug, their fingers brushing in a way that sent electricity up her arm, which would be concerning for entirely different reasons. Theo laughed, the sound warm and genuine. It transformed his face from the serious CEO she'd observed from afar into someone real and approachable. "We should probably talk about logistics." "Romantic," Morgan said dryly, settling into the chair across from him. "I'm serious." But he was smiling. "Monday morning I'm calling HR. I want everything documented properly. You'll be transferred to a different reporting structure, probably under Janet in the literary division. She's brilliant. You'll actually learn more from her than your current supervisor. Your salary gets reviewed, probably increased because frankly you're underpaid for your contributions." Morgan's coffee nearly went down the wrong pipe. "You can't give me a raise because we're whatever we are. I'm giving you a raise because you've been underpaid for 2 years, and I've been waiting for a non-suspicious moment to fix it." Theo's expression turned serious. "Everything by the book, Morgan. I meant what I said about protecting your career." "What about your reputation? If people think you're dating an employee, let me worry about that." He set down his mug and leaned forward. I need you to understand something. I've spent 15 years building this company, and I've never once mixed business with personal life. People who know me will be surprised, but they'll also know I wouldn't do this unless it mattered. The weight of that statement settled between them. And does it matter? Theo's blue eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. I don't show up at someone's apartment at 4 a.m. for something that doesn't matter. They spent the weekend in a bubble of their own making. Theo went home to change and returned with takeout for lunch. They walked through Prospect Park, far from Midtown Manhattan where someone might recognize them. Morgan learned that he'd grown up in Boston, the youngest of 4 brothers, and had started his first business at 19. Theo discovered that she'd wanted to be a writer before becoming an editor, that she still wrote sometimes late at night, stories she never showed anyone. I want to read them, he said as they sat on a bench watching joggers pass by. Absolutely not. Morgan shook her head firmly. That's like, I don't know, performing surgery on your own boss. I'm not your boss anymore. As of Monday, remember? He bumped her shoulder with his. But I'll wait until you're ready. It was moments like that, small, patient, understanding, that made Morgan realize how different this was from anything she'd experienced before. Derek had always made her feel like her work was competition for his attention. Theo seemed fascinated by every aspect of who she was, but Monday arrived with the harsh reality of office politics and curious eyes. Morgan walked into Brennan Media Group with her stomach in knots. She dressed carefully, professional but not like she was trying too hard. Theo had texted that morning, meeting with HR at 8. Your transfer will be announced by 10. We've got this. The morning passed in a blur of whispers and sideways glances. By lunch, the rumor mill had spun into overdrive. Morgan heard everything from, she must have something on him, to, I heard they've been secretly dating for years, to, most hurtfully, gold digger. She was hiding in the women's restroom, trying not to cry, when Janet Reeves found her. Janet was 55, whip smart, and had been with Brennan Media since its inception. She was a legend in publishing circles, and Morgan had always admired her from afar. Morgan Kelly, Janet said, leaning against the sink counter. My new editor, apparently. I'm sorry, Morgan blurted out. I know this looks bad. I know what people are saying. Do you want to know what I'm saying? Janet interrupted. I'm saying that Theo Brennan is the most ethical man I've ever worked with, and if he's restructuring departments for you, then you must be something special. She paused. I pulled your file this morning. That Patterson book? Brilliant catch. The Morrison memoir. Your editing notes were some of the best I've seen. You've been wasted in junior roles. Morgan felt tears threatening again, but for different reasons. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. I'm a demanding boss and I don't care who you're dating. You'll earn your place in my division. Janet's expression softened slightly, but for what it's worth, I've known Theo for 15 years. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looked at you in that editorial meeting last month, when you were arguing for the Chen manuscript. He was at that meeting, Morgan tried to remember, but it had been packed with at least 20 people. Standing in the back, didn't say a word, just watched you present. Janet smiled. Some of us noticed. We were wondering when he'd finally do something about it. The day improved after that, though Morgan still felt the weight of scrutiny. She threw herself into work, meeting with Janet to discuss her new projects and responsibilities. The raise Theo had mentioned was real, a 20% increase that made her want to cry and argue in equal measure. At 6 p.m., as she was packing up her desk to move to her new office, actually an office, not a cubicle, her phone buzzed. Dinner? There's a place in Brooklyn where no one from the office goes. Promise, Morgan smiled, despite the exhausting day. Only if we can pretend to be normal people on a normal date. Define normal. No talk of work, no talk of HR policies, just 2 people getting to know each other. Deal. Pick you up at 7. But as Morgan gathered her belongings, she didn't notice the woman watching her from across the floor. Victoria Chen, senior editor and Theo's ex-girlfriend from 5 years ago, observed with narrowed eyes and a carefully neutral expression. Victoria had ended things with Theo when it became clear that his company would always come first. She'd made peace with it, moved on, even dated other people. But watching Theo restructure departments and risk his reputation for some junior editor triggered something ugly and familiar in her chest. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number she'd saved for emergencies. Marcus? It's Victoria. Remember that reporter friend of yours at the Post? The one who loves corporate scandal stories? She paused, watching Morgan leave the floor. I think I have something that might interest him. The restaurant Theo chose was perfect, intimate, dimly lit, and blessedly free of anyone from the publishing world. They sat in a corner booth, and for 3 glorious hours, they were just Morgan and Theo. Not CEO and editor, not boss and employee, just 2 people who laughed at the same jokes and debated whether Hemingway was overrated. He's absolutely overrated, Morgan insisted, stealing a bite of Theo's dessert. Spare, masculine prose. We get it. You're very tough and stoic. The man won a Nobel Prize, so did Bob Dylan, and half his lyrics don't make sense. Theo laughed, that full, genuine sound she was becoming addicted to. You're impossible. You like impossible, Morgan felt bold, probably from the wine they'd shared. Admit it. You like that I argue with you. I love that you argue with me. The words slipped out, and they both froze. Love. It was too soon for that word, too fast, too much. They'd known each other for 1 weekend as anything more than professional acquaintances, but looking at Theo's expression, vulnerable and honest and maybe a little scared, Morgan felt something shift and settle in her chest. We should probably slow down, she said softly, not meaning it at all. Probably, Theo agreed, also not meaning it. He reached across the table to take her hand. But I've been going slow for 3 years. I'm not very good at it anymore. They were so focused on each other that neither noticed the flash from a smartphone camera across the restaurant, or the way the man holding it smiled before slipping out into the night. The photograph hit the internet Tuesday morning, with a headline that made Morgan's blood run cold. Billionaire CEO Theo Brennan's office, romance, power imbalance, or true love. The article was everywhere. The Post, industry blogs, even picked up by national outlets. The photo showed them at dinner, hands clasped across the table, gazing at each other with an intimacy that couldn't be denied. The accompanying text was worse, full of innuendo about promotions and preferential treatment. Anonymous quotes from sources close to the company suggesting Morgan had strategically positioned herself for advancement. Morgan sat at her new desk, staring at her computer screen while her phone exploded with messages. Taylor had called 6 times. Her mother had texted in all caps. Even her ex-boyfriend Derek had somehow found the article and sent a sneering, "Guess you upgraded." The worst part was the comment section. Hundreds of strangers felt entitled to judge her choices, her character, her worth. Gold digger, opportunist, home wrecker. Though that one didn't even make sense since Theo was single. The few supportive comments were drowned in a sea of vitriol. A knock on her office door made her jump. Janet stood there, her expression serious. Conference room. Now. Theo's called an emergency meeting. Morgan's heart sank. This was it. He was going to end things to protect the company. She'd be transferred again or quietly encouraged to resign, and this beautiful, terrifying, impossible thing that had just started would be over before it really began. The conference room was packed. Every senior editor, the entire HR team, department heads Morgan barely knew, and at the head of the table stood Theo, looking every inch the powerful CEO in his charcoal suit, his expression unreadable. Their eyes met across the room, and Morgan tried to memorize everything about this moment, the last time she'd look at him as something more than her former boss. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," Theo began, his voice carrying the authority that had built an empire. "By now you've all seen the article. I'm sure many of you have questions, concerns, and I imagine a few of you are worried about the company's reputation." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Morgan wanted to disappear. "I'm going to be very clear about something," Theo continued. "Morgan Kelly and I are in a relationship. It began this past weekend. Before that, there was no inappropriate contact, no favoritism, no abuse of power. HR has reviewed every interaction we've had over the past 3 years, every email, every project assignment, every performance review. The documentation is thorough and transparent." He clicked a button, and a presentation appeared on the screen. Dates, times, a complete timeline of Morgan's career at Brennan Media. Morgan earned every opportunity she's received based on merit. Her transfer to Janet's division was planned before our relationship began, based on her exceptional performance. Her salary increase reflects market rate for someone with her skills and contributions. In fact, she was underpaid compared to peers at her level. Morgan felt tears burning behind her eyes, but refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of everyone. "I understand this is unusual," Theo said, his gaze sweeping the room. "I've spent 15 years maintaining professional distance, but I'm also a human being, and sometimes life doesn't follow the neat lines we draw for it." He paused. "If anyone has concerns about favoritism or improper conduct going forward, my door is always open. But I want to be absolutely clear. Morgan Kelly is one of the most talented editors this company has. She belongs here based on her work, not her personal life." Victoria Chen stood up from the back of the room. "And what about the optics, Theo? What about when clients question whether their projects are assigned based on merit or relationships? What about it, Victoria?" Janet cut in sharply. "You dated Theo 5 years ago. Should we have questioned every decision you made after that? Should we retroactively review your projects for bias?" Victoria's face flushed. "That's different. We kept it private." "No, you kept it quiet because you were afraid of exactly this kind of judgment." Janet stood, and Morgan realized she had an unexpected ally. "I'm tired of double standards. If Theo were dating a woman from outside the company, no one would care. But because Morgan works here, suddenly she's calculating and he's inappropriate. Meanwhile, 3 people in this room are married to colleagues they met at work, and no one questions their integrity." Michael Torres, the CFO, spoke up. "Janet's right. Sarah in accounting married James from legal. Derek in marketing is engaged to Amanda from sales. Half of us met our spouses through work." "That's not the same as dating the CEO," someone muttered. "You're right," Theo said firmly. "It's not the same, which is why we've been more transparent, more careful about documentation than any other office relationship in this company's history. If that's not enough, then maybe we need to examine why we hold women to different standards than men, and why we assume they can't possibly be valued for their talent when they're in relationships with powerful men." The room fell silent. Morgan felt her chest tighten with emotion. Gratitude, fear, something that felt dangerously close to love. "This meeting is over," Theo announced. "Get back to work. We have books to publish." As people filed out, Morgan remained frozen in her seat. Janet squeezed her shoulder in passing. "You okay, kid?" Morgan nodded, not trusting her voice. Soon, only she and Theo remained. He closed the conference room door and crossed to where she sat, kneeling beside her chair so they were eye level. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I should have anticipated this, should have protected you better. You can't control what people think or write," Morgan's voice cracked. "But Theo, the comments online, they're brutal. People I've never met hate me. They think I'm using you, that I slept my way into a promotion." "Stop." He took her hands in his. "Listen to me. Those people don't know you. They don't know us. They see a story that fits their narrative about powerful men and ambitious women, and they run with it. But we know the truth. The truth is complicated. The truth is I watched you for 3 years because you're brilliant and passionate, and you see stories the way I do. The truth is you could have had any job in publishing with your talent. The truth is I'm the lucky one here, not you." Theo's blue eyes were fierce. "And if you want to walk away, if this is too much, too fast, too public, I'll understand. Your job is safe regardless. But Morgan, I need you to know that I'm all in. This isn't some fling. I don't risk my reputation or restructure my company for flings." Morgan felt tears finally spill over. "I'm scared. Me too." His admission surprised her. "I've never done this before. Never let anyone close enough to risk this much. But I'm more scared of letting you go and spending the rest of my life wondering what if." She thought about Derek, who had made her feel like she had to choose between love and ambition. She thought about 3 years of making herself small, invisible, safe. She thought about Friday night, drunk and heartbroken, sending a text that had changed everything. "What if it doesn't work?" she whispered. "What if we try this and it falls apart and I've lost my privacy and my reputation for nothing? Then at least we tried." Theo brushed tears from her cheeks with his thumbs. "But what if it does work? What if this ridiculous, complicated, impossible thing is actually the best decision either of us ever makes?" Morgan looked at him, really looked, at the vulnerability in his eyes, the hope mixed with fear, the way he was offering her everything and asking for nothing but a chance. She'd spent her whole life reading stories, analyzing them, understanding their structure. She knew how these narratives were supposed to go. The power imbalance, the public scrutiny, the odds stacked against them. In novels, these relationships rarely worked, but she also knew that the best stories were the ones that surprised you, the ones that took familiar elements and transformed them into something new. "Okay," she said finally. "But we do this right. No hiding, no sneaking around. If we're going to weather this storm, we face it together." Theo's smile was like sunrise. Together, I like that word. He stood, pulling her to her feet, and kissed her softly. A promise and a beginning. 6 months later, Morgan stood in Theo's penthouse apartment, which had become their apartment after she'd moved in 8 weeks ago, staring at the finished manuscript on her laptop. She'd finally let him read her writing. Not just read it. He'd loved it so much he'd insisted Brennan Media publish it, though only after 2 other senior editors had reviewed it blindly and agreed it was brilliant. "You're sure about this?" she asked, as Theo emerged from the bedroom in sweats, his hair still damp from the shower. "Publishing my novel, people are going to say that my girlfriend is a talented writer?" He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Let them talk. They've been talking for 6 months. We're still here." He was right. The initial scandal had faded into background noise. Morgan had proven herself in Janet's division, acquiring 3 major titles that had nothing to do with her relationship and everything to do with her instinct for great stories. The industry gossip had moved on to newer scandals. "I got an offer today," Morgan said quietly. "Whitmore Publishing. Senior editor position. Big salary increase." She felt Theo tense behind her. "Are you considering it?" "I was for about 5 minutes." She turned in his arms to face him. "Then I realized I don't want to leave. Not because of you, or not just because of you. I love working with Janet. I love our team. I love what we're building." "You could have both," Theo said carefully. "Your career and us. I'd never ask you to choose." "I know. That's why I'm staying." Morgan smiled. "Besides, someone needs to keep the CEO humble. Might as well be me." Theo laughed, pulling her closer. "Have I told you today that I love you?" "Not in the last hour, slacking off, Brennan." "I love you," he said against her lips. "Even when you argue with me about Hemingway." "Especially when I argue with you about Hemingway," she corrected. Her phone buzzed with a text from Taylor. "Dinner tomorrow? Want to hear about the wedding plans. Also, Marcus wants to meet the famous boyfriend. Warning, he will absolutely interrogate Theo about his intentions." Morgan showed Theo the message. He grinned. "I can handle an interrogation. My intentions are very serious." "How serious?" Instead of answering, Theo crossed to his desk and pulled out a small velvet box. Morgan's heart stopped. "I was going to wait," he said, returning to her. "Plan something elaborate and romantic, but we've never been conventional, have we?" "Theo, I'm not asking today. I just want you to know that this is where we're heading. That you're it for me, Morgan Kelly. The brilliant, argumentative, impossible woman who drunk texted me at 3 a.m. and changed my entire life." He opened the box, revealing a stunning emerald-cut diamond. "When you're ready, no pressure, no timeline, this is waiting." Morgan looked at the ring, at Theo, at the life they'd built despite impossible odds and public scrutiny and every reason it shouldn't have worked. She thought about that Friday night 6 months ago, heartbroken and wine-drunk, making what seemed like the biggest mistake of her life. She thought about how the wrong text message had turned into the right story. "Ask me," she whispered. Theo's eyes widened. "What?" "Ask me now, because I don't need elaborate or romantic or more time to know that this, us, is real." He knelt, and Morgan realized she was watching her own life become the kind of story she'd spent years reading about. Messy, complicated, imperfect, and absolutely real. Morgan Kelly, will you marry me? "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at once. "Yes to everything. To the scrutiny and the headlines and the people who will say I'm a gold digger or you're having a midlife crisis. Yes to all of it, because none of it matters as much as this." As Theo slid the ring onto her finger and pulled her into a kiss that tasted like joy and promise and home,